Hello, it's Thursday. So today I'm going to be talking about no-sew designing, specifically 3 approaches that I like to think of as simple, custom, and combined. Now I am going to be building off ideas that we already covered in the Ultimate Beginner's Guide, so if you haven't already, I do encourage you to watch that one first. Okay, so a general disclaimer, same as I did last time, there are no wrong ways to approach designing. But in order to simplify the language I'm using today, I'm going to be talking about things as rules. So once you know the rules, you can feel free to break the rules as much as you like. Okay, and we will not be pounding on the desk to sync our audio today because it's making the camera go woo. Now, no-sew designing can make things a lot easier or a lot more complicated. It does have the benefit of ensuring that anybody trying to make your pattern is going to get all of their bits attached in the exact same location as you, and consistency does make for a good pattern. But it can also quickly overcomplicate a design, making something that could have been beginner level into something way more advanced. Now, a lot of the time I'll incorporate no-sew design elements into my patterns without going like full no-sew, so do keep in mind that you can mix and match the different techniques that we'll be talking about today as well. Okay, so tools and materials. Now, before you get started on any project, whether that be designing or just making a pattern, you need to make sure that you have everything you need before you start. You'll just thank yourself later if you do. Now, I want you to see the original video if you need more information as to why I've picked certain tools and materials, but basically for today, what you're going to need are a notepad and pens, some scissors, a good sturdy acrylic yarn, your 3.5mm hook, any eyes that you want to use, some stuffing, and you may still need pins, so have them on hand just in case. Now, you may also want to use a ruler during your design process, as we discussed during the Ultimate Beginner Guide, but because I'm not using one today, I haven't got one out on my desk. The first 2 steps of this process are going to be exactly the same as the first 2 steps in the Ultimate Beginner Designer's Guide. Now, I'm going to be using a cat in my demonstrations today, and I've never really been fully happy with any cat design I've made, so we'll see how that goes. So first you need to sketch your idea. Remember that knowing exactly what it looks like from the front, side, and top will help you later. We're going to quickly sketch our 3 cats. Then we're going to break our design down into pieces. And you can do this as though you were just going to make each piece in the most straightforward way. So that's your prep work done, and now we can move on to the more interesting stuff. So next up, we need to choose our approach. So the approach that you're going to choose today is going to largely come down to the pose of your idea. As we work through these steps, it's best to keep in mind the goal, the overarching goal for the day, is to remove all sewing. That means that you might have to compromise a little bit on what your original idea was, just to simplify things a little bit. Alright, so let's have a look at a couple of poses and see what I mean. The approach you take will likely come down to the pose of your idea. So mostly up and down designs, usually in a seated position like this one here, can be accomplished with the simple method of joining as we go. Basically, you make the smaller pieces first, and then attach them to the main body nugget as you work it up. This is what most people would think of when they are talking about making something no-sew, as in terms of approach, it's pretty close to standard designing. So you'll see there that the base is going to be a mostly round shape, because we can see that here from this nugget, that we're going to attach the other bits to. We'll be able to work it in parallel rows to that round, making it really easy to attach these pieces in order as we go. So next up, we have something with a lot of area touching the ground, for example, laying down. And that would qualify for the custom base approach. This is where you make a specifically shaped base piece to build up from, worked as a flat piece instead of just starting with a magic ring. So on screen right now is what the custom base for my Stegosaurus looked like. By designing it this way, I've avoided the need to have to sew on the head and tail afterwards, and instead could just work it up in one big spiral. So I have my little laying down cat here. So because she has quite a large surface area, the base is basically this whole section here, which is kind of a combination of this piece and this piece, and we'll get more into what that looks like in a little bit. Now, something standing, whether on 2 legs or 4 legs, again, mostly up and down, I would approach with a combined base. And I think of it as combined because we're basically combining the simple and custom bases. To put it simply, you make the legs and then use a custom base as a bridging piece between them and build upwards from there. Designing this way is like building a multi-story building. First the legs, then the base, and then the head. If you aren't sure which of these three matches up to your design, then try and think of it this way. What part of your design is touching the ground? If it's a round shape, it's simple. If it's a strange shape, it's custom. And if it's multiple shapes, it's combined. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is designing one of each type so that you can get a better feel for the process that goes into each of them. So first up, we're going to be doing a simple one, which is the sitting cat. So as usual, we're going to start with the sketching phase. So as I've mentioned, the simple method kind of relies on a join as you go kind of basis, which means that we need all of the openings of our pieces to line up with the direction of our rows. So a seated position like this can make that a lot easier. My rows are going to run across, and I'm going to be able to join those front legs horizontally in that row. I'm going to be able to join the ears as they go around the head. And these little back feet, I'm going to adjust the pattern slightly so that they attach to one row at the bottom instead of sticking out. This is kind of what I mean when I'm talking about compromising. Now the tail will just be attached probably in a similar way to the back feet, just in the center back. It's just hard to see from this drawing. So the overall picture is going to look something a little bit more like this. If you'll forgive my tiny cat sketches. So yeah, the tail will attach similar to the way I'm going to be doing the back feet there. So in the instance of simple designing, our base that we need to be thinking about is actually our main body nugget. Now this can be easiest just because it is the closest to just standard designing. There's not a lot of adjustment to make, and that's why a lot of people think of this as no-sew designing. So step 2, we're going to make the body nugget. Now a lot of you may choose to skip this step, but a big part of learning a new process is learning the really long way to do it, and then you can start finding your own shortcuts. So stitch up your body nugget. Make sure that it is the exact shape that you want it to be. And for bonus points, you can alternate colors in each row to help you in step 3. Now I do recommend working in a spiral for this step because at the back you'll be able to see kind of a very jagged little line, and that's where the start of my row is. It really helps when trying to identify which stitch we want to attach things into. So say I pin something like here, I'll be able to count up to that round and then I'll know which stitch in the row it's in as well. And so I can make really accurate notes as to where things are supposed to be attached. So we do this step because then we can make all of the pieces that we want to attach in the round, pin them on, and note in our pattern exactly where they go. Now this stops you having to think about attaching things as you go while also trying to form the shape, while also trying to do all of the other little bits and pieces. Step 3, the attachable pieces. So I've worked on my main body nugget there, and now I just need to finish making the pieces that are going to attach to it. Okay, so there are all of our little pieces. So what we're looking at there is 2 front legs, 2 back feet, a tail, and 2 ears. I'm not super happy with the tail, but it will do for now. So with all of your pieces made, there has been no real difference up to this point now between standard designing and no-sew designing. But what we're going to do at this point is pin all of our pieces on and then note on our pattern where we've pinned them. So I'm going to start with my front legs. And the idea is that you just, keeping them in line with the different rows, move them around until you're happy with how they look. Now, just in case you were worried about yarn wastage, while the body nugget can be frogged and recycled, these little pieces that I'm pinning on at the moment are the exact pieces I'm going to join in my next version of this particular pattern. So nothing's going to really go to waste. Now with the ears in particular, I want to try and use the curve of the head in my favor to help give them a little bit of character. So yeah, that's an approximation of what I'm going for here. So you've got the tail, the feet, and those little ears, all lining up with the existing flow of the rows. So now what I need to do for each piece is note here on my pattern where they're pinned. So the easiest place to start are these first 3 pieces. So I've got the 2 back feet and the tail. I'm going to count upwards from my starting magic ring, and because I've done those alternate colors, it's really easy to tell. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it looks like all 3 pieces are attached in row 5, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this one here. So I'm making a dot here so that I don't lose which row I'm looking at. I'm going to identify the start of my row, which is here, and then count the number of stitches in it is. So 1, 2, 3. The 4th, 5th, and 6th stitch is the first foot. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13th, 14th, and 15th is the second foot. And then we've got 22, 23, and 24 as the last as the tail. Now for each of these pieces, I'm probably going to join them over 2 rows, but that's all the notes that I need for now. So then moving up the body, we have our front legs. I can pull these pieces off at this point. They're just going to get in the way as I try and count the rest of it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the front arms attach in row 9, which is this one here. And I'm going to follow row 9 around until I find the start of it, which is here, and then count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. So stitches 9, 10, 11, and 12 is arm 1. And then it looks like arm 2 attaches right next to it. So 13 to 16 is arm 2. Again, I'm going to just pull those off. And then it's time for the ears. Now, am I super happy with the ears? No. Will they do for today? Yes. And count. So they are in row 19, which is this one here. And it looks like they adjoin right from stitch 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1 to 5 is ear 1, and then 17 through to 22 is ear 2. And again, you can just pop those pieces off to one side at that point. So there we have our chart of where we want our things to attach to. So now we can pop our demonstration nugget to one side for frogging, for recycling, for cutting up into stuffing, or for assembly later if you're so inclined. And grab the color you want your actual pattern to be. Step 4, make the nugget again. So this time when we make the nugget, we're going to be stitching to attach the pieces into it. So here I'm just going to work up my body nugget until I reach row 5, and then we're going to start attaching our pieces. So there we are, we've worked the first 4 rows, and I've started row 5 as well, just because I know our first foot attaches in stitch 4, so I've worked the first 3 stitches. I'd actually worked the first 4 stitches, that's my bad. So now I'm going to pull in my 2 feet and my tail, all of which attach in this row. Now, when it comes to attaching the different pieces in line with the stitches, you actually have options still. So you can choose to work through both layers of your attachable piece, which can act as a little hinge and give a lot of definition between the pieces. Or you can choose to attach like the bottom row of the piece in one row and then the top of the piece in the other, which actually gives you like a 3-dimensional join. This can look a little bit more seamless, but it'll also stick out at a different angle from the body. So you should try a few things and see which way is going to work best for your design. So it looks like we do them in order. So we go foot, foot, and then tail. I'm just removing the pins so that it's not a hazard. And I think for the feet, what I want to do is an open join, not a closed join. So what that means is I'm going to work the bottom row of the foot in this row and then the top row of the foot in the next row, kind of like I was attaching a finger to a glove. So I'm attaching this foot, which has 6 stitches in its opening, to the next 3 stitches. And in order to do that, I'm going to lay it against the outside or correct side of my piece. Insert my hook through 1 stitch of the foot and 1 stitch of the body, and work the stitch. So the first stitch of this join actually falls on an increase. Now, normally I would shuffle things around a little bit just to make it easier, like move the feet up 1 row to where I'm just working 30 single crochet. However, for the sake of the demonstration today, I've decided just to work them as they fall, because inevitably one of you are going to run into this problem. So how I did that join there is it still worked as an increase from the base's perspective, so 2 stitches into the 1 stitch, but I've worked it into 2 stitches of the foot. So the first one went through 1 stitch of the foot and 1 stitch of the body, and the second one went through the next stitch of the foot, but the same stitch of the body. So then I just have 1 more to work as a single crochet. Like so, and there is my little foot half attached, so the top half is still not joined. So then I'm just going to work around to repeat the process for the other foot. so, and I'm going to just attach it on. Like so. So there are my back feet attached. So now I'm just going to work around to where we want the tail to be. So there we go. And for the tail, I think I'm going to attach through both layers. So what that means is we flatten the opening of our tail and insert your hook through both layers and then into the body. Like so. And repeat that the whole way along. That works best when there is an even number of stitches, but don't let an odd number stop you. Just work one through only one layer. And then just finish the row. So that's us at the end of row 5. And what I do at this point is stop and check that I'm happy with everything. So my tail is slightly off to one side, and I could choose to sort of move it around. And I think I'm going to. I feel like it's, normally I would just forgive the wonk, but I do feel like I'm supposed to be setting a good example in this video. So fine, I'll move the tail around a little bit. So instead of starting in stitch 22, I'm going to start it in stitch 23. I'm going to update my notes straight away, like so, and then reattach. And once again, finish the row. So there is our base again. It's looking more even now that I've moved that tail over one stitch. And that's what it currently looks like from on top. So at this point, what I'm going to do in my notes is confirm this location, just leave a little note for myself, and also update the next row down. Because I've only attached the bottom half of the feet, that means that they need to be attached into the next row as well. Give a little signal that we're attaching something in this row. And because it's a row of single crochet, I know it's just going to be the same stitches around again. But you could also just add to this row as you need to. So what you would do is work your row as per usual until you reach the top half of the piece you're attaching. And I can see the 4th stitch is clearly meant to be 4th, 5th and 6th across the foot. So at that point, you could update your notes as well. So you can do these ones here as you go, or predict them before you get started as well. And to attach the top half of the foot, I'm going to insert my hook just through the foot. I could insert through the body as well if I wanted to like lock it down, but inserting through the top of the foot only leaves it as a little pocket. So that has sort of practical applications if you want to be able to stuff the piece afterwards, or just if you don't want it locked down into a flat position and you want it a little bit more flexible. So that's the end of the row there. So for these arms, just pulling them in here, I'm going to attach one working through both layers and one working through just one layer on one row and one layer on the next row, just so that it can, I think it'll give you a more clear demonstration than what's happening here and here. So I'm going to attach those in this round here now. Whoop, shoop. Okay, so there the difference is highlighted really nicely, I think. So this leg here has been joined through both layers in the same row. You'll notice that it's lying in a very sort of flat position. And you'll note that this here has a much nicer join to it. It forms way more seamlessly with the body than it does working through both layers. But it's a matter of personal preference, and it's going to come down to what you're trying to accomplish with your pattern. So I'm going to frog this all the way back, and I'm going to attach both of them through both layers the way I've done here. I'm then going to carry on and keep working until we reach row 19, where I'm going to be joining the ears. Now, if you're eagle-eyed, you may notice that I swapped to a smaller pair of ears. That's because the large ones just weren't working for me, you know? Which means that I did go back to my original body nugget, line them up again, and adjust which row I was attaching them into. So there is the first of our lumpy little dumpling cuts. We're going to pop this one to one side and look at the next one. Custom level. Okay, so for this one here, I'm doing this little lying down cat. So in its simplest form, I think about this as making a flat surface the shape I want my ummy to be. So I'm going to start with the sketch of what that foundation piece should look like. This can be a little tricky, I'll admit, but it does circle back to the original step. Know exactly what your idea looks like before you start, which will be something like this. So you see there, I've got the front paws protruding at the front, and then just sort of a little bit of a booty. Then it's going to be worked up as a flat piece. Now this is the type of designing I haven't really spoken about before, But in general, it's the same as working in 3D. If you increase in a row, it's going to get wider, and if you decrease in a row, it's going to get narrower. You can also add chains to extend a row or stop halfway through a row to give a more jagged corner. Now, I could start this by working from the back forward like this, but I think what I'm going to do instead is start at the side and work up this way. That way I can use chains to extend my row out to form these front paws instead of trying to adjust them on the fly over here. As you're making your shape, keep in mind that you will want to single crochet around the edge of the whole piece for your first row. So in some cases, you may want to make it narrower than you otherwise would. So that will be that little fat bit. So I then want to extend my row all the way out to the end of this front foot. So to do that, I'm going to chain and basically extend that base chain. So about that long, keeping in mind that that's a turning chain as well. So now I'm going to turn, and you'll see I have additional stitches to work into for this row now. So that is what we currently look like. So in the next row, I can see here that I don't want to go all the way to the end of the paw. I want to stop 5 stitches in. So I'm just going to work this as a short row and then just basically turn when I'm only about halfway and just kind of carry on and build up my shape one row at a time like that. So there is the foundation piece that we're going to use to form our second little lying down cat. So you'll notice that the paws are quite thin. That's because we're about to single crochet around the whole edge, which will give it a little bit more width. So that is actually the next step to this. We're going to single crochet around the whole edge. Now I want my base piece to still lay flat once this is done, and I'm going to control that by any time I have a corner, I'm going to put an increase into it to help my rim bend around those edges. As I make notes, I'm going to describe what I'm doing. So for example, along this stretch here, I'm going to put 6 single crochet to the back corner. You don't want just 50 single crochet around the edge. What you want is 10 single crochet up to the top of the front leg. Increase in the corner, 2 single crochet across the chest, things like that. You'll thank yourself later, and anyone else trying to follow your pattern will thank you as well. I'm going to put 5 single crochet to the back corner, and I'm going to write down 5 single crochet to back corner. And I'm just going to make sure that I write my notes that way the whole time. So I'm going to finish working up that edge now. So there is my entire first row. Now at this point you might want to revisit your sketch and adjust your row direction so that they all run parallel with that first base piece. So from here, you can just treat this the same way you would a round foundation and start building up your shape from there. Whoop. So just like that. Still not super happy with the ears, but the point is made. We started with a flat panel and built up the rest of the shape from there. And I attached the tail as I went. So that is Lumpy No-So Cat number 2. And now we just have our third and final one, which is the combined base. So now we have the combined one, which is kind of taking everything we've learned from the simple and from complex and mashing them together and seeing what we get. So for this type of designing, as I mentioned before, it can really help to think of your design as a multi-story building. So my Loch Ness Monster is an example of this. So I've got him here, where the first level was this underbelly here. And then we built up the body until we reached the base of the head. And then this is actually at the start of the second level here, where we built out more of a base and built out the head from there. Stegosaurus is also an example. So the first floor is the soles of the feet, and the second floor is that belly. So for today's cat, I'm doing 3 levels. There's the soles of the feet, and then the belly, and then the head. So each level is kind of like a save point. You only need to think about one level at a time. So for our lumpy standing little cat, the first thing we need to look at is the first base, which I can see is just the soles of the feet. So first thing I need to do is just make 4 legs. Now there's no difference between this step and just making normal legs, so don't overthink it, okay? Keeping it relatively easy for today. It matches the legs that I've used on the other 2, and there they all are. So that is this whole first level done, which brings us to our second floor. And what you need to do is really just reset your thinking. So this is your new starting point. All we have to do is work out what shape we need this base here to be in order to be able to build up this next chunk of our design. So basically we come back to our sketchbook. One of the big things about this base is it has to incorporate how these legs are going to join into the body. So I'm going to start by just sketching the opening at the top of the leg. You'll notice it doesn't matter what the leg itself looks like. All we really care about is that opening at the top, just like that. So this is the front here. Then what we need to do is draw the bridging piece between these legs. So for me, I can see that like the front of the body stops level with the front of the leg, and the back of the body basically stops level with the back of the leg as well, but there is a slight gap in between here, and there is a slight gap in between the legs here as well. So I can assume that that opening exists on the other side and that this exists at the back too, which is why my legs are spaced like this. So the piece that I need to make is basically just filling in the rectangle. Like so. Now the shape that I need to make actually doesn't need to include those legs at all because we've already got those pieces. So the shape we are making is actually this. So you would get your ruler out and rule in your rows. Like so. Indicate your starting point. And then basically just work this piece up as a flat piece. So next up, we're going to stitch it. So crochet your bridge piece as a flat piece using the techniques described in the custom bases section, which I have done there. So you'll note that it's slightly crooked, and that is just because I used chains to extend it out on this side and then turned, and as I worked my way back over, I used chains to create it on this side as well. You'll also note that I've done square gaps and not these rounded ones, and it's just something to keep in mind is that you don't have to be super precious with it. Crochet stretches, so it's allowed to be a little bit jagged or zigzaggy. And so this square edge is going to fit around that rounded piece just fine. Now, in the meantime, I've also made the other bits that I want to attach. So that's the tail and a couple of ears as well. Now, I wasn't really thinking I shouldn't have finished off this piece. I should have just continued around. So I'm just going to reattach my yarn in that corner. Now, just as we did with the laying down cat, we're going to work a rim of single crochet around. But this time you're going to join your legs into the gaps we've built for them. So the next step of this is going to be joining your legs into each of the corners. So the first thing you should do is work out which way around you want your legs to go, because I've got a very clear front and back to mine, and my legs also have a very distinct slope to them. So I need to make sure that I'm keeping my pieces the right way around. So what I'm going to do is, again, keeping notes about where I am on this base, I'm going to work 3 single crochet along the back, which should bring me to my first leg opening. And I'm going to grab my leg and I'm going to work into both this base piece and into the leg to join it into that opening. Now keep track of how many stitches of the leg you're working into while you do this, because you're going to want to make it even for pieces like this. So it doesn't really matter if you have 4 legs or 2 legs, you need to keep them evenly attached so that they make sense. So I've just attached this particular leg around 5 stitches. So I am just going to update my little chart here. So this is sometimes an easier way to write your row. So I did 4 single crochet up this length, and then I did 5 stitches along the inside of the leg. My leg itself has 9 stitches around, so I know that that leaves 4 single crochet on this outer edge, and that's going to be important next row because next row we'll be working around the whole outside of the piece. So next up I should have 3 single crochet along the width, and I'm basically just going to work around and attach each of the legs. So there we are, I've got all 4 legs attached there, and I've made my little notes here, and I would then write these notes out in long form. I can't stress this enough, make sure your notes tell you what part of the base you're working on. 10 single crochet across the front, 5 single crochet to join the leg, that sort of thing. So if you'll excuse the ratty working out on this page, knowing I start there, I would go 4 single crochet along back, 5 single crochet for leg, So I don't need to write to attach leg. I would add that later when I'm sort of prettying up the notes a little bit. So that's our instructions for joining all these pieces together. And the next thing we're going to do is continuing back into that first stitch. So those internal stitches that we did were just to attach the leg. They are not part of our round anymore. We are now going to work around the outside of each of these legs. One thing to be mindful of when doing pieces like this is that sometimes where the pieces attach into the main body, it helps to put a little increase in the area where they join in, because otherwise they can sometimes get pulled askew and stick out at strange angles. So it's just a matter of like looking at what yours is trying to do and seeing if it's forming the right shape. So there is that, and that is our first row. So that gives us our completed base, and now you just need to form the shape for the level above it. Now, in most cases, that will be the rest of your piece. In this case here, I'm going to work up the body, attach the tail, close in on this side, all things that I've done on the custom one, and then when I get to the head, I'm going to do the chin as a final sort of level of this one here. So I'll be back in a minute. So there we go. I've worked up a big chunk of the body, and the tail is half attached. It'll become more firmly attached in the next row to pull it up into position. But I want to start working on the head now at this point. So once again, we can pretty much ignore everything except for the opening of our design. So for this base, I need to add to the opening a flat piece to form the underside of the chin to shape the head. So to make this base, what I want to do is extend this opening out a little bit to form the underside of the chin. So I'm going to build this shape by using short rows to extend the base in the direction that I want the head to face. I'm going to build it using short rows to extend the base in the direction that I want the head to face. Now, honestly, I could simplify this particular pattern a lot just by using increases to build out some width at that point, but I just thought this was an interesting demonstration to include in the video. So again, I'm going to start by sketching the opening and then the shape that we need to add. So our opening is currently this long oval shape, and we've kind of got this tail at the back that we're going to largely ignore, but it's good to sort of draw orienting details on there. And then we outline it just so that you guys can see it on camera. It's not an important step in the actual design process. So I want to form my chin on the front here. So I need to make like this little rectangle kind of shape. It's not going to be a big one, but it's just a little bit. I can use my actual opening to work out how far across that is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 stitches along the front there. So I can include that detail. And I'll probably just do 3 rows to build that out. So the first one will be 6. And then I want to expand in a flat way. So I'm going to start with 6 single crochet to form the basis of this. I've already single crocheted around to where I want it to start, and I'm going to work my first row, which is 6 single crochet. And I'm going to expand that out to 7 because I didn't like that it wasn't centered. So now it's looking a little bit more centered between those 2 front legs. A chain 1 and turn. And that's 7. Again, just checking to make sure that it's centered where I want it to look. And by doing this, I could have had the head pointing out in a different direction as well. It's just sometimes it's easier to work your base prototype symmetrically and then adjust accordingly. So I would amend this to make it 7 across. And then something I tend to do is I draw out my 7 stitches. Just like this, just as a little kind of chart. And then I've got my little chain 1 there. And I kind of work out how I would make this shape. So I'm going to do that using a decrease. These are not proper charting methods. I'm not suggesting you copy me by any stretch of the imagination, but this is just how I find it easy to quickly visualize the stitches that I need. So the next row I'm going to do 5, and I'm going to balance it by having a decrease on either side. And then in the final row, I'll do the same thing again. So I'll decrease and decrease with a single crochet in the middle. So I'll finish with 3 stitches, and there'll be like a chaining turn at the end of each of those rows. Now, just as a comment on short rows, make sure when you're adding them to a design that when you transition back to working in the round that you've turned your work back to its original rotation. Sometimes that means chaining 1 and turning at the end of the final row. And sometimes it means just carrying on straight from the final row without turning. So there is my new base. Now you may notice that it's sticking straight up in the air unless I like actively bend it down. I could have resolved that by using front post single crochet along this original opening, but I'm just trying to keep things pretty simple for this example. So ironically, my work is now facing the correct way because I've been accidentally working this entire piece inside out. Happens to the best of us. But I want to keep my orientation the same as it's been this whole time, so I do have to go back to working backwards, and I'm sorry if that's confusing on the screen. So with that being the last of the row, I'm now going to sort of work down and around the edge to rejoin and finish the row that I was working on, which ends sort of back here. So there is my new base now, and I'm just going to continue working up this piece now. So I'm going to be focusing my decreases along the back here. I'm going to finish attaching that tail and basically use decreases to move my opening up to this end where I'll be working up the rest of the head. I'd also like to acknowledge that I frequently use chains to leave openings that I'm going to work into later, but this video can't go on forever and that felt more appropriate to like a shaping video. I don't know, what do you think? Like so. I actually kind of like this one. He's got a little chunky boy. But what about the ears? I can feel you thinking it through the screen. No, I didn't forget them. One final thing I can share about no-sew designing is sometimes you can just build your pieces straight on top of your other pieces. You'll be able to see here that I've incorporated some back loop only stitching into the main head shape, leaving the front loops free. So if your pattern is intended for other people to use, this can be a really nice detail to incorporate as it does help ensure consistent results from your pattern. So what I'm going to do is join to the side of the head and work a row. So there is my base for the ear, and I'm going to build it up from there. Okay, so I'm still not a fan of the ears, but the rest of it's pretty good. So there are our three cats, all with different poses, all completely no-sew. Now, I do just want to say that I am aware that the proportions are off on each of these, but the whole point of today is to look at how we start building up the main structure of pieces. So I thought it was more important to show my raw prototypes than it was to show you properly polished pieces. But I at least really like the pose of this one. So I might repurpose that in another design later. Okay, so I'm going to be bringing you more patterns over the next couple of weeks. I think pangolin is next if my muse is cooperating. To anyone who made it this far, thank you for watching the whole video. Use the word baffle in your comment down below to identify yourselves, and also just because baffle's a great word and should be used more often. Other than that, I'll see you next week. Okay, bye!